Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics, and today I'm going to show you how to make a double wedding ring quilt. Now I've made a couple double wedding rings before. This one here, it's about 25 years old. You might recognize some of these old Concord country floral prints, and it's really a fun pattern to make. It's got nice circles, you see some little diamonds in here, and it's really satisfying to stitch it up. Now here's the thing about the double wedding ring. It has these beautiful curved edges, but unless you're going to make it small and do a flip finish like I did here, you're going to have to put curved binding around it. You also can't make the quilt any larger by adding borders unless you wanted to do a lot of complex curved stitching to get those borders on. But I found a template set, and it comes with some nice instructions. And this will allow us to make either a curved edge double wedding ring quilt or one that has square edges. So we can put multiple blocks together and make a rectangular quilt. We can add borders, and then we can do traditional binding on it. And I'm very excited to get started with this. What we need to make this quilt is a background. I've got this nice light green one here. You need 2 accent fabrics. These are going to end up in the diamond area. And then you need something for your arcs, either one fabric like I've used here or a variety of fabrics. Now, if you're doing your arcs in one fabric, you're going to need to cut them from yardage. But if you're doing them patchwork like I've got here, you can use either a jelly roll or charm squares or a layer cake, and that's what I'm going to use. Now, I'm going to make 12 of these blocks, so I'm pretty much going to use up a whole layer cake to make the patchwork part here. If you're using a different pre-cut or yardage, you're going to need a different amount. You're going to need different numbers to cut those. So I've written up a little size chart, and you can get that by clicking the link that's right below the video. Now, in addition to the layer cake, for the size that I'm making, we're going to need 1/4 yard of 2 different accent fabrics and 2.5 yards of background. The first thing we're going to do is take these layer cake squares and we're going to cut them into 2.5-inch wide strips. And that's why it's so easy to make this if you're using a jelly roll or you're using charm squares, because the jelly roll is 2.5 inches wide and the charms are 5 inches wide, so you can just cut them in half. So I'm going to take 4 or 5 squares at a time because that's easy for me to cut, and I'm just going to slice it into 2.5-inch widths. Once you have your strips cut, we're ready to use our templates. Now, you do need templates to make a double wedding ring quilt. The templates I used on my last couple quilts were like this, and they work great, but you can only make a quilt with curved edges with this style. Also, there's only a couple marks here to help you match up your curves when you're sewing them. So you need a lot of hope. I call it the hope and sew method to get these curves to match. It does work, but with this style, there's a lot of marks we're going to put on the fabric, and that will help us get to the skill of matching these curves a little bit quicker. So I'm going to take these strips and I'm going to cut them with this wedge-shaped template and piece them back together, and these are going to be used in our arc. Now, if you're making your arc out of one fabric, you can just go ahead and cut it using this. But when you're piecing it, you're going to take this template and just cut all these strips up like this. So you cut one way, and now you flip the template over, and it'll fit right on that edge there, and then cut the other way. And you'll notice, because I've got these jagged edges here, the template isn't fitting perfectly on there. There's a little bit extra over there, and that's okay because we're actually going to sew these all together. Then we're going to put this template on it and cut off all the excess. So don't worry right now if they don't look like they're cut perfectly. Once you've got those cut, head on over to the sewing machine. pick out 6 different fabrics. Doesn't really matter what goes where, just try to get 6 different ones. I've got this nice colorful group of batiks, so it's pretty easy for me to get 6 different ones. Let's get an orange one. We're going to put the fat part up here, so when we stitch them together, it's going to make a nice gentle arc. So just put these right sides together and stitch them with a 1/4 inch seam. Open it up and then add the next piece. Keep doing that till we have a nice arc. Now the seam allowances, we basically want to press them all towards the center. So I can press this one towards the center, this one towards the center, and then I can go over here. That one's towards the center, that one toward the center. This middle one, it doesn't matter which way you go. Either way is fine. Once you've got those all stitched into arcs, you're going to want to iron them. So I like to spread it out flat on the table and just give it a little bit of steam. Now we're going to use our arc template on these pieced things that we made. Now to make these next cuts, you have to be able to move your cutting mat around because we're going to be cutting in all different directions. So if you have a small mat, that's perfect. Mine are all big, so I'm going to use this one. This is actually a rotating mat. You don't have to have this style, but it is pretty handy if you have one of these. So put your piece on there, and then we're going to put the template on here, and we're just going to move it around so that where these marks are going to go, these are not on a seam allowance. For most of the cutting that I do, I use this 60mm cutter from Olfa, but it's a little too big when you're doing curves. So I'm going to use a 45mm cutter here. And a lot of you probably use this for most of your cutting, but it really is easier to do curves with a smaller cutter. So I'm going to start on this long curve here. So I'm just going to hold it down firmly, go right around the edge, and then I can rotate this. And you'll see there's a little teeny bit we're going to cut off here. We're going to cut off that corner a little bit. Then we'll do this edge. And every corner gets cut off a little teeny bit there. And we'll go all the way around. And every time I need to turn that mat, I'm going to turn it. Keep making cuts till it's all done. And you might be wondering, is it hard to keep the template from moving? And it can be, but I've got some little sandpaper patches on here, and the template set came with this sticky back sandpaper stuff. So you can cut a little bit off, tear off the backing, and then stick it onto your templates. So that keeps it from moving. Now, if you don't like the feeling of that, you can always flip it over and use it from this side where there's no sandpaper, so it's nice. You can use it either way. Now we want to make some little slits or marks where all of these slits are in the template. So you have a couple of options. You can hold the template down and make a little pencil mark or a little chalk mark, and then you can move the template and cut them. Or you can try this method. If you have some small scissors, you can hold the template and just, I'm sliding right under the fabric and just making a little snip. This is a little bit harder for me. That's why I like making marks and then coming back and doing just a small snip. See this one right here? It's about 1/8 of an inch snip. See this one here? You don't want to snip beyond where your seam allowance is going to be. And these snips, these are for marking. You don't need snips to make it stitch correctly. So if you just want to do pencil or chalk marks the whole way, you can do that too. It's a matter of personal preference. Now, if you want to save some time, mark one of your arcs, but stack up 3 or 4. I've got 4 stacked here. And then I can snip through all those layers all at once. And again, the rotating mat is going to help. And I'm making the snips, again, about 1/8 of an inch, so it won't be beyond my seam allowance. Now we're going to use our next two templates, and we're going to cut some background pieces with these guys. So the first step is to cut 8-inch squares. From each 8-inch square, we're going to get one of these in the one corner, this in the middle, and then we're going to get another one of these on the far corner. So what we're going to do is line up these two edges on the sides we've already cut, and I'm cutting 4 layers here. If you're not comfortable cutting 4 layers, you can cut less. And I'm just going to start here, go all the way along there. You can just go straight off the edge there, and I'm going to slide that out of the way, and I'm going to cut off these little guys. And I think it's easiest to just mark this right now. So again, if you're going to use a pencil, you can just draw in all those lines. Or if you want to use scissors and make small cuts, you can just do those snips right now before you even move the template. Now we can take this template and move it over here, line it up with these two cut edges, and we can cut this one. Again, I'm going to just slide this part out of the way and even up these little ends. And again, if you want to just use scissors right now to cut, you can just hold the template down and slide right under just a little bit and make a little snip. Now to cut this middle piece, anywhere in there is fine. And we'll just go all the way around. And you can see now how handy it is to be able to spin this around, so I can get the little tip there and just keep cutting. So the background is all cut and it's all marked, and the last piece we need to cut is the corner squares. That's these two accents here. So the easiest way to cut these is to first cut 2.5-inch squares. Once these are into squares, we're going to take our last template piece and we're going to line up this corner on those two cut edges there. Then we're just going to have to cut these sides here. So let's get this little corner piece off. Go around this gentle curve. That little guy. And that little itty bitty corner there. And then we're going to mark it again. So I've got a silver pencil here. That works pretty well. And then I'm going to snip through there. Little snip there. Little snip there. Now we've got everything we need to start sewing. The two pieces we're going to start with, one of the corners and one of these arcs. So this is how they're going to fit together. But to sew them right sides together, we've got to flip them like this. So you can see the curves are going in opposite directions. Now, first things first, this cut edge is going to go along this cut edge. And so to figure out where you start, I'm lining up these two edges, and see where that little point is in the arc right there? That point right there needs to meet the very edge. So I've got to slide it up just a little bit farther. And now I'm going to stitch 1/4 inch, which is right where that point is. So I'm going to slide this right over to the machine and just take a couple stitches. So we're going to keep stitching, and we're going to try to have both the raw edges lined up right about where we're stitching. That means as we're going, this one is going to have to be moved like that, and this top piece is going to have to be moved like that. Now I've got marks and snips right now, and that's so that you can see it easier on film. So I'm just going to curve that a little, take a few more stitches, and then I'm just going to keep curving and stitching a little, and you can see if these marks line up. It makes it really, really easy to sew this curve together. Now here, my top mark it's a little bit above this mark here, and that just means I need to pull the top a little as I sew so that my marks will line up. So I can see down here where they're coming, and I'm going to slide the bottom over, slide the top over, and you can just keep adjusting as you go. It's really very easy. I thought this was going to be a lot harder than it is, and I'm going to show you a couple of times so that you can see how easy this is. I haven't sewn very many of them. I've sewn about 10 practice ones, so I've kind of gotten the knack of it, but it's really a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. Now when we open this up, the seams are going to go toward the background, and I'm not really going to finger press it because I don't want to stretch it out of shape, but I'm just going to pat it down a little bit. But look at that nice curve there. So let me show you one more time. Remember, we're lining up these two cut edges, and then we're making that little point right in the middle of the background, and then take a couple of stitches. Now the easiest way to get these curves to work is to hold the top fabric in your right hand and the bottom in your left hand, and then as you sew, you're going to pull like that. So just take a couple of stitches, and then again I'm pulling the bottom to the left and the top to the right so that just a little bit of the edges line up. And you just sew a few stitches at a time. I'm not even lifting the presser foot. I'm just stitching and sewing. So if it looks like your marks aren't going to line up, you can pull the top a little bit, or you can pull the bottom a little bit, because we are working with curves here and they've got a little bit of give. When we get near the end here, show you where we're supposed to end up. Again, with the pointy part right in the middle of the background. So it's a little hard to see. But when you stitch it right like that, with the point right in the middle, then when you open it up, we end up with this being one nice gentle curve. Once you've got 8 of these done, then we're ready to move on to the next step, which is these pieces here. Now we're going to put these onto 4 of these units. So let's take the top one here, and this is going to fit right here. So we're going to put them right sides together, and I think I'm going to turn it over so I can see my marks a little better, because this batik doesn't really have a right or a wrong side. And again, we want to line up these 2 cut edges. So if we kind of roll that right to the end there, those are going to match up, and we're just going to start stitching with our 1/4 inch seam away from this cut edge. Again, take a couple of stitches, and then you're just going to have to curve it just like you did the last time. So I'm holding the top with my right hand, the bottom with my left hand, and I'm just going to gently pull them, the top one to the right, the bottom one to the left, and just feed it all the way down the curve. And you just keep matching your little slits, few stitches at a time, curving as you go. And now that end is going to match the end there. When we take this off and open this up, now you can see we've got a nice curve there and we've got a nice curve there. So let me just show you where these ends meet again. This is where I started, and when you open it up, this should be one long line. Now mine's not perfect. I've got a teeny bit extra of the green there, but it's pretty close. And then at the end of it, where I stitched off the end, again, you see how those line up there? And again, when you open it up, it should make one long line. Again, mine's not perfect yet, but it's pretty close. Now that we've got those 4 completed, we need to go back to these guys because they need to have something put on each end so that they will be big enough to stitch onto here. So we're going to take one of these green pieces and we're going to stitch it on here. So that 90-degree corner, that's going to be the corner of our block. It's this curved side that we need to stitch on here. So I've got little slits on both sides here, and I'm going to line up this edge here. This is where I'm going to sew. So there is a little snip gone in the corner there, and that's just so that we won't have quite so much bulk when we put our blocks together. So I'm lining up the cut edges here and using a 1/4 inch seam. Again, just take a couple of stitches and curve as you go. And I'll show you what it looks like. So this piece is curved like that. I'm exaggerating, and I'm going to press this seam allowance. This one you can finger press a little toward the green. Now we're going to put a purple one at the far end. Again, the 90-degree corner goes over here, and this is going to go right sides together here. And I think just to show you what I'm doing, I'm going to draw on this. If I do a 1/4 inch seam, that's where I'm stitching. And on this end, I'm not going to draw the whole thing. That's where I'm stitching. So, lining up these edges and having that line on the edge of this piece, that's where you start sewing. We've got a little corner of this purple, if I can lift it up there, that's going over this corner, and that's okay. It just helps if you have an idea of what am I trying to sew here? What am I trying to match up? And now we're just curving it around here, and my white mark where I drew the chalk there should be on the edge of this background when I come to the end. And that way, when this is done, this should make one long line. Now mine isn't perfect. I've got a little bit extra green here, but this side's just perfect, and that's what we're heading for. One long curve. Now once you've got those 4 done, you may want to take these and iron them. I tried ironing right now, and I tried waiting and ironing at the end, and I prefer to wait and iron at the end. But you may want to iron. You can do it either way. Just be careful when you iron that you don't distort your block. You want to keep this square. I notice mine tends to want to curve in right here, and that's just because you've got curves here, so you just want to be careful to keep it flat and don't stretch anything and distort it as you iron. Now we can take one of each of these, and we're going to stitch this last seam. So right sides together here, and remember this side is going to line up with this side. So we'll put those edges even, and then we'll move this up right to where we're going to start, which is a 1/4 inch in from this edge, which is right there. That's where those 2 pieces are meeting, right there. So I'm going to stitch a couple stitches, and then pause and keep turning and matching everything up. And again, I did find it easiest to hold the top in my right hand, the bottom in my left hand, and just keep curving as you go. And when you find those little snips, line those up as best you can. So all the way down the edge here. At some point it feels like you just need to pull that over and fold it a little, and that's okay. That way you can see what you're doing a little bit better. It helps so much to have those marks or snips. Now let's see how close we were to getting everything matched up. Oh, this one's pretty good. I've got it almost perfect right there. Let's go down to this end. This one isn't as good. It should be coming in at the same spot there. I don't think I'm going to take it out and re-stitch because I'm not really that picky, but you can, if you really don't like that match there, you could take that out and ease it into place a little better. Now this is where that intersection is that I did not have lined up very well. You can peel it back here and make sure that those seams where they crisscross a 1/4 inch away are lined up. And that'll help you make that look better than my first one did there. I just notice I get better as I go. So check each one as you do it, see how closely everything is lined up, and then you can make little adjustments. Now that we've got 4 of these blocks done, we are ready to put our big block together. So here is what it's going to look like. All we have to do is sew straight seams now. So I'm going to put that on top of there and that on top of there. Bring this over, line it up, and this just seems so easy after sewing all those curves. Then I'm going to bring these 2 guys over. Now I'm going to press this seam allowance to the right, and you can finger press it, and this seam allowance to the left. And now we can sew this last seam here. And it's pretty thick where all these seams come together, right here. But if you just go slow and careful, you can get everything matched up. And I'm going to finger press to one side. You may find that you want to press this seam open, especially if you've got thicker fabrics. I've got batiks and they do finger press pretty easily, but you could press this seam open if you like. Now we're ready to iron. Now to iron this, you'll notice it's not very flat, and that's because it's really almost impossible to sew these without stretching them a little bit. So you do have to be really careful when you iron, because we don't want to make it worse. We want it to get flatter. So I'm going to pat it flat, and I'm going to start on these sections here. I'm not going to use steam. I'm just going to flatten these 4 areas out. And then I'm just going to try to coax this back so it's squarish. You can see this is curving down a little, so I'm just going to flatten it out a little with the iron, dry iron right now, because we don't want to use steam till we've got it pretty flat and square. And it does want to get back to the shape it ought to be, but sometimes you've got to just help it along just a little bit. Once you get it looking flat and square, then you can add some steam. So there's the finished block. So I'm going to go ahead and make all 12, and then I'll show you what it looks like. I've got these all done, so let's get them laid out, and then we can start to see how the rings intertwine and how these 4 accents come together here. So you see, when you put 4 together like that, now we've got another ring showing. So every time you put another block out, you get all these intertwined rings. There. This is a quilt that looks much better when you have multiple blocks all laid out. So it's going to be really easy to get these blocks together because we only have to match here and here. Very easy. I'm going to put the top together, then I'm going to put a little border on out of the background fabric, and then a printed border on, then I can get it onto this quilting machine. The double wedding ring has the borders on it and it's on the machine here. And now we need to pick a thread color. I think I'm going to stick with something light because I don't really want the quilting to show much in these light areas. Obviously we could go with this, which is the same color background, but it's going to show quite a bit in those dark areas. This is kind of a dark aqua. That looks really good. It blends into the light areas, and even in the darkest areas it doesn't show much. I've got one that's slightly lighter. It'll probably show more on those dark parts. I've got some light blue. Again, this would work great. This will blend in, won't show much on the patchwork. I think I'm going to like this green the best. For the quilting, I'm going to use a pattern called Bubble because it's got these nice circle designs, and I think that will look good with the double wedding ring pattern. I've got the whole quilt done. I just could not be happier with how it turned out and how much fun it was to make. I was honestly a little bit anxious about sewing the curves, but it was much easier than I thought it was going to be. Now, the double wedding ring, the way we made it, you couldn't see the rings all intertwined until we have it all done now. Now you can't even see where one block starts and where one block ends, but this is one block right here with that circle and those extra things. It's when you put them all together that you see everything meshed together. So it turned out 57 by 73 inches after I added the borders. And if you want to have a curved edge on your quilt and you don't want borders, you can simply leave off these outside corner pieces here, and then you can still make the curved edge. You can see the quilting here with those nice big and small circles all over, and I really like the way it doesn't fight with the pattern at all. Now for binding, I used a fabric that's very similar to the border, and then the backing, it's the same print as the border, but it's a darker color, and I used that lighter thread so you can really see the quilting on there. Now, a word about these accent fabrics here. My accents are similar in colors to what I've got in my arcs. You certainly could do colors that were a little bit different, and then it might pop a little more. But I really like the way this repeats throughout the whole pattern. It gives it a nice balance. Now, one thing I noticed when I was stitching this together is that it would be a perfect project to use up scraps on. Because the pieces are so little, and because you're cutting from a template after they're stitched together, scraps would be just perfect. But remember, if you want to use any of the pre-cuts, I will have some size guidelines right below the video in the link, and it'll tell you how many you need of each different size. Thanks so much for watching our tutorial today on how to make the double wedding ring quilt. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have questions, leave them in the comments below and I'll be sure to answer. Now, we're going to have a giveaway. This is called Tea Time in Bali. We did a tutorial on how to make this. It just comes from one jelly roll and a couple of borders. But today you can win this quilt. So it's very easy to enter our giveaways. Just click the link below the video that says giveaway, and you put in your name and your email address. And remember, we can send the quilt to anywhere in the world. So good luck. Now, if you like our tutorials and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That would really help us out. Happy quilting!